The 7th century was a time of great upheaval in the Eurasian Steppe Belt. As the Turkic Khaganat, the first transcontinental steppe empire in history, pushed into Europe, it drove several steppe people to the west, notably the Avars. But a certain group of nomadic warriors located in modern-day Ukraine persisted in all of these arrivals: the Bulgars. These people spoke Oguric, the same Turkic dialect that was prevalent among the Huns in Europe and the White Huns in Central Asia, and are synonymous with the Onogur, a successor state to the Hunnic Empire of Attila. After the Turkic Empire's complete disintegration, pressure from the Khazars and the newly arriving Majars made the Bulgar tribes leave their home, embarking on a journey to the southwest. There, they founded the First Bulgar Empire and consolidated their rule in the northeast Balkans. In the following centuries, the Bulgars waged many wars against the Avars in the west, Majars in the north, and the mighty Byzantine Empire in the east. As more and more nomadic Turkic peoples arrived from the steppe, including the Pechenek and Kipchak, the Bulgarians' identity was changing. Over time, they converted to Orthodox Christianity and mixed with Slavic peoples, in the process adopting the Slavic language. While the political affairs of the Bulgarian Empire are well known, its prehistory, the history of Old Great Bulgaria, remains relatively obscure. And we have mentioned the Bulgars many times on this channel. Now we will finally explore their complete history, from their roots among the Onogur people to their traditions and original culture, a possible connection to the Dulo tribe of the Gökturks, and their most prominent leaders.
Shout out to all of our supporters on YouTube and Patreon who made this video possible. Before we begin, we should clarify two things. First off, Bulgars and Bulgarians are two different terms that sound similar, but refer to two different periods of time. Bulgar is often used to talk about the Turkic people that this video is about, as members of the Onogur Federation and founders of their eponymous state in the Ponto-Caspian region. The later Bulgarian empires, on the other hand, were, of course, ruled by a part of the Bulgars. However, the geographic circumstances and mixing of the Turkic core tribe with local, mostly Slavic groups, and the slow conversion to Christianity massively reshaped Bulgar identity after the 8th century. Thus, we will also refer to the pre-Christian and pre-Slavic people as Bulgars instead of Bulgarians. Think of it like the difference between Turkish and Turkic. That being said, Bulgarians today are understandably proud of their pre-Balkan history, just like the Turks are in Anatolia. But where does Bulgar history actually start? The origin of the ancient Bulgars has been a subject of extensive academic debate. We need to consider recent analysis of sources and results from auxiliary scientific disciplines like linguistics, archaeology, anthropology, and genetics, and have put a significant focus on linguistic data. In academia, the proposed homelands of the ancient Bulgars include Western Central Asia and Southern Siberia, as the Bulgars entered the Ponto-Caspian region after the Hunnic invasion of Europe. Their earliest appearance on the European continent would be between the late 5th and early 6th century. The Bulgars seem to have been somewhat influenced by Finno-Ugric people, in the form of the Volga Bulgars, who would emerge a few centuries later. But more about them in another video. That being said, the Bulgars in the Ponto-Caspian region are among the most ancient of all Turkic peoples in the Caucasus area, being in good company with the Sabirs, Kutigurs, Utigurs, and the Onogur. These were all Turkic peoples, and all linguistic traces also lead to the conclusion of the Bulgars being a Turkic group, most likely speaking a form of Oguric Turkic. This very dialect was also spoken by the Hephthalites in Central Asia and the Huns in Europe, as both ruled over their respective territory simultaneously in the 5th century. You can check out both the documentaries about the Hephthalites and other Hunnic peoples in Central Asia, and the video about the Huns of Attila on this channel to get a quick overview of what made them special. But what made the Bulgars then so special? Being an offshoot of the Hunnic Empire, they stayed in the Ponto-Caspian area as part of the Onogur Federation. We have also covered this state in another video. In summary, the Onogur encompassed at least 10 Turkic tribes that roamed between the Volga and the Black Sea from the 4th to the 7th centuries. The name literally means 10 tribes and implies that they were also speakers of Oguric Turkic. However, while tribes like Kutrigurs and Udagurs were mentioned by Eastern Roman sources as far back as the 5th century, the Bulgars seemingly entered the scene at the beginning of the 6th century. From then on, the term Onogur Bulgar appears in our sources. Their relations to the other Onogur tribes are unclear, but it is likely that a new tribal group formed during the 6th century that was henceforth called Bulgar. This name is derived from the Turkic prefix bulga and means as much as to stir and to become mixed. Several scholars agree with the implication that other Turkic peoples designated this new group as a rebellious one, inciting internal strife or even rebellions. But who did they rebel against in the first place? In the 6th century, the Onogur, with all their subjected and neighboring groups, became subjects of a new empire that emerged from the east, the Turkic Khaganate. Established in Otukin in 552, this state quickly expanded to all directions. As they were chasing the Avars, their former masters, away from the steppe, they conquered and annexed all of the Eurasian Steppe Belt, until arriving at the Volga River. While focused on the interplay with the Byzantines and Persians south of the Caucasus, the Turks probably controlled all of the tribes of the Onogur Federation. This became evident when the Turks, angered by the Byzantines' help for the fleeing Avars, ordered the siege of the Crimean Peninsula. The Hunnic general Bokan successfully conquered the city of Panticapaeum and besieged Chersonesus for several years. The eastern part of the Turkic Empire suddenly collapsed in 630 for a number of reasons, while the rulers of the western part retreated from the Caucasus back to Central Asia. Now, many of its tribes that had migrated to the west became politically independent. Among them, the Khazars, who we have also extensively covered in the past. Unlike the Turks, the Khazars started expanding into the west, subjugating the Kutrigurs and Utrigurs in the process. By this time, one half of the Bulgars had joined the Avars in the west, while the other half joined the Khazars. But in the year 635, the Bulgars revolted. Under the leadership of Kubrat Khan, they became independent and formed a state that became known as Old Great Bulgaria. This new state was located north of the Black Sea and in the Caucasus region. Kubrat's efforts were crucial in unifying the Ogur and remaining Bulgar tribes, marking the beginning of a new Bulgar ethnogenesis, where all these groups were collectively identified as Bulgars. But Kubrat's personal backstory is different than you might think. For starters, he grew up in foreign territory. Notwithstanding his Ponto-Caspian roots, Kubrat spent part of his youth in the Byzantine Empire, a common practice among the sons of steppe nobility from neighboring tribes, often intended to secure alliances and educate future leaders. This experience in Constantinople exposed him to Christian influences and Byzantine statecraft, which might have influenced his ruler later on. Kubrat's family descended from the Dulo tribe. The Dulo are also mentioned in sources from faraway China and in Turkic sources as being a collection of 5 Turkic tribes within the Western Turkic Empire, aside from the Nushibi, another collection of 5 tribes whom with the Dulo were in constant strife with. The Dulo's original name in Turkic was Uchtuluk, those with the 3 tu. A tu is a pole with circularly arranged horse or yak tail hairs of varying colors arranged at the top, basically a banner to designate royal dynasties and entire armies. These poles were also prominent among the Oghuz Turks, the Mongol Empire, and even the Ottoman Empire much later on. Both before and after the collapse of the Western Turkic Empire, certain tribes migrated to the west. It is very likely that Kubrat's family literally descended from the very Tuluk that used to rule over Central Asia. Virtually all Turkic and Mongolic tribes used to have tamgas, symbols that designate a tribe or even kingdom. The Dulo of Kubrat, the Tuluk of the Gökturks, and even the Kayi tribe, from which the Ottomans claimed descent, all carried the same tamga. It is supposed to resemble bow and arrow. Just for comparison, here's an overview of other prominent tamgas used by Turkic and Mongolic dynasties. Back to Kubrat himself, he and his Bulgar union appear in various sources of the early medieval period. Theophanes, a Byzantine monk, called him Kubrat of the Onogur Huns. The Patriarch of Constantinople, Nikephoros, also wrote about Kubrat as the Lord of the Ono Wundur. Others either referred to him as a Onogur or a Hun. In any case, it is clear that the Bulgars evolved out of the Onogur state. But which of the tribes to claim as the Bulgars' ancestral tribes? We'll leave that question open. Kubrat's revolt against the Avars may have been directly instigated by the Byzantine Empire. After all, the Bulgar king had cultivated a cordial relationship with Heraclius, the emperor in Constantinople. Under Byzantine influence, Kubrat was even baptized and became a Christian. An Egyptian bishop called John, who resided in Zawiat Razin in the Nile Delta, was an observer at that time and wrote an interesting passage about Kubrat and Heraclius. As the Avars had allied themselves with the Sasanian Persian Empire, the Byzantine rival in the east, it appears only logical for Heraclius to support the Bulgar revolt against the Avars. Just a few years earlier, Heraclius had celebrated a victory against Persia with Tongyabgu, the last great king of the Western Gökturks, by coming together in the Armenian highlands and making a feast. More about that in the next video. In the following decades, Old Bulgaria became established as a political entity within the borders that you can see on this map. With its political power center at the Dnieper River, the Bulgars expanded far into the east, even conquering the northern Caucasus area. As the Gökturks had collapsed, like we mentioned before, there was no other state entity to stop the Bulgars. Nikephoros claims that Kubrat Khan would have given his 5 sons very specific instructions shortly before his death. The Khan told them to never separate their place of dwelling from one another, so that by being in concordance with one another, their power might thrive. Kubrat died between the years 660 and 665. But as Asparuh, his youngest son, took power over the Bulgar people, a new danger from the east threatened to destroy Great Bulgaria: the Khazars. Having inherited different regions of the empire, they faced a critical juncture. The eldest son, Batbayan, chose to submit to the Khazars, a decision that led to the absorption of his territory into the Khazar Khaganat. He only ruled for a mere 3 years. Meanwhile, Kotrag, the second oldest son, led a group of Bulgars northward, founding what would become known as Volga Bulgaria. This entity, centered around the Volga River basin, would develop its distinct identity, blending Turkic traditions with local influences, including those from Finno-Ugric peoples. The most consequential of Kubrat's sons, however, was the aforementioned Asparuh. He led his followers westward, across the Danube, into the Balkans. This migration was not just a retreat from the Khazars, but a strategic move towards new opportunities. In this uncharted territory, Asparuh and his Bulgars encountered the Byzantine Empire, a superpower whose influence was pervasive in the region. The Byzantines, under Emperor Constantine IV, were initially hostile, leading to a series of confrontations culminating in the crucial Battle of Ongal in the year 680. At Ongal, which was probably located at the Danube Delta in modern-day Romania, more than 10,000 Bulgar warriors faced off against 20,000 Byzantine troops. As the Bulgars were led by Asparuh, Emperor Constantine commanded the Roman army. After having concluded a peace treaty with the Arab Caliphate shortly before, he was free to move against the Bulgar intruders and contain the threat from the north. But Constantine underestimated Asparuh's diplomatic abilities. In the 7th century, the so-called 7 Slavic tribes were roaming in this very region. Asparuh made a pact of mutual defense with all 7 tribes. When the Byzantine army approached the Bulgar camps, all of them came to aid the Bulgars in battle. Thus, Constantine was actually facing off against 2 separate factions, albeit with less manpower. The Bulgar-Slavic coalition decisively won the battle. In the following year, Asparuh even advanced as far as Thrace. He forced Constantine into a peace treaty, under the condition of permanent settlement of the newly conquered areas. It was this treaty that sealed the creation of the First Bulgarian Empire, one that had not been the first empire to be ruled by Bulgars, but the first Bulgar state on the Balkans. Henceforth, the Bulgars would rule over a vast portion of the Balkan region. Situated between the Franks in the west, Avars in the north, and Byzantines in the south and east, the Bulgars would rise to one of the Middle Age's greatest superpowers. Granted, this new empire also initiated both the Slavicization and Christianization of the Bulgar peoples. But the original culture of the Bulgars was neither Slavic nor influenced by Christianity. It was both Turkic, as implied in the intro, and most importantly, Tengrist. In ancient times, all peoples of the eastern steppes, whether within tribes, kingdoms, or empires, were followers of Tengrism. This was a polytheistic religion with monotheistic themes, one that emerged more than 2,000 years ago, somewhere between the Altai Mountains and Lake Baikal. As the Xiongnu state, the first steppe empire in history, disintegrated, many tribes, most of which were speakers of an ancient Turkic language, migrated westwards. And as the Huns of Attila arrived in Europe, they brought their religious beliefs with them. The first steppe empire to openly articulate Tengrism as a state religion, though, was the aforementioned Turkic Khaganat. Yet the tribes of the Onogur Federation were already accustomed to the main principles, deities, and practices of the Tengrist religion. This, of course, included the Bulgars. We have talked a lot about Tengrism itself on this channel, and highly recommend checking out any of these older videos to get a deeper understanding. But while we prepare a remake of the Tengrism series, it seems worthwhile to analyze the differences between the faith of the Bulgars and steppe peoples. Interestingly, the Bulgars called their prime deity Tangra instead of Tengri. We do know that both names are interchangeable. After establishing the Bulgarian Empire, they even gave this name to the peak of the Rila Mountains, which is located in western Bulgaria. This name, Tangra, was later changed to Musalla, which means as much as near God in Arabic, by an invading Muslim force. This force was, ironically, the Turkish Ottoman Empire. Both states thought of the peak to be a place that enabled a connection between earth and heaven, which included God. Indeed, the practice of classifying mountains, and especially peaks, as places of worship and shamanist rituals was common among steppe peoples. The higher the elevation of the place was, the easier it would be to establish a connection with the divine beings above. That is why places such as the Altai Mountains between Kazakhstan and Mongolia, as well as Khan-Tengri in Kyrgyzstan, enjoyed high esteem among the ancient Turks. It was also thought that heavenly beings, once souls within human bodies, were sent back to Earth to look after humankind. They would dwell in mountains and also rivers, lakes, and forests. While the Bulgars had distanced themselves very far from the actual steppe region, they did not leave this faith behind. To the contrary, in pre-Christian times, Tengrism was deeply interwoven with the Bulgar political system. All Khans were legitimized as being divine rulers on a mission by God, Tangra, to rule. While we don't have clear statements that were made by other Oguric Turks nearby, such as the Huns of Attila, the same principle, divine rule as ordered by Tengri or Tangra, can be found among the aforementioned Xiongnu and Gökturks, but also the Xianbei, Uyghurs, Khazars, Kyrgyz, and so on. Tengrism also inherited lots of elements from pre-state times, however. These included totemism, according to which humans form a kinship with a spirit being, especially animals. Shamanism, which was the practice of shamans, originally called Kam, conducting religious ceremonies and taking care of the sick and old within society, and most importantly, folklore. The latter was prevalent, especially among those who migrated far away, telling epic stories with mythical elements about how their ancestors went on adventures into unknown territory, fought dramatic battles, and established the state in which they were living much later. War and conflict were certainly not extrinsic to Tengris peoples. The history of the steppe peoples, and especially the Turkic groups, is full of civil wars, revolutions, and succession crises. But these conflicts were not supposed to be fought along cultural lines. In general, Tengrism preached tolerance towards non-Turkic, non-Mongolic, and non-Tengrist cultures. That is why the great rulers of the steppe acted benignly towards foreign peoples, who they conquered and integrated into their empires. The big difference in the case of the Bulgars is that they were involved in a conflict against another state that propagated a different monotheistic belief and which lasted for several centuries. The only other applicable case study would be the Khazar Khaganate. You'd think that in time, the Bulgars, pagans in the eyes of their neighbors, would have also antagonized the Christian faith on a cultural level. But the Bulgars did neither persecute Christian commoners within their realm, nor did they envenom the Byzantine Empire, their big rival in the east, due to the latter's Abrahamic faith. Despite many bloody battles and geopolitical assertiveness, the Bulgars stayed tolerant. But what happened to the Bulgars' original culture? Why did these religious elements and the Tengris faith disappear, seemingly vanish from the landscape? Remember that we stressed the original language and cultural affiliation of the Bulgars in the beginning of this video. Although elements of it appeared in non-Turkic cultures too, Tengrism in its fully developed form and with all of its various elements was first and foremost a Turkic religion. Tengri, not in an abstract form representing heaven, but as the ruler of the sky, was literally called God of the Turks in several sources. The old Turkic Torah, the secular laws of all ancient Turkic societies, was interconnected to the religious element. When the Bulgars entered the Balkan area, they were slowly assimilated both on a secular cultural level and on a religious level. We have to keep in mind that the Bulgar people, as successful as they were in conquering the Balkans, were not a group of many people. Only a few 10,000 men, women, and children arrived with Asparuh's army. While this is a rather high number for a migrating steppe people, it pales in comparison to the demographics of settled, non-Turkic groups in the region. As the so-called 7 Slavic tribes had arrived with the Bulgars in the Danube region, the ethnic assimilation of the Bulgarian Empire was initiated. Over several centuries, more and more Slavic people from the north migrated into the state. They intermixed with the local population and, most importantly, with the actual Bulgars. A few centuries later, Bulgaria had become Slavicized on a state level too. Today, the Bulgarians share a very little amount of non-European Asian ancestry, a very low number for a state whose identity was distinctly Turkic. The second dynamic that led to the final loss of ancient Bulgar culture was religion. The Christian faith was taken on by several Bulgar rulers, starting with Kubrat Khan. Just as the rulers of the Khazar Empire further east had embraced Judaism and made it a state religion, the Bulgars turned towards Christianity, obviously influenced by their Orthodox Christian neighbors. In the early 9th century, Bulgaria, under the leadership of Khan Krum, emerged as a significant force in southeastern Europe. In this period, interactions with the Byzantine but also Frankish empires increased in quantity and intensity. Being a non-Christian nation, the Bulgars found themselves somewhat isolated, given the Christian dominance in neighboring states. The widespread Christianization of Europe, including the Saxons, left few non-Abrahamic societies, among which were the Bulgars and Slavs. These groups, along with the indigenous Thracians, who had been Romanized or Hellenized and were predominantly Christian, collectively shaped the Bulgarian identity. However, the religious divide between the so-called pagan and the Christian communities posed challenges to their unification. It is noteworthy that Christianity had already taken root in the region that would become Bulgaria, even before the state's official establishment, primarily through these native populations. The main initiator, however, was a Bulgar and not an outside force. As new wars were looming once again, Bulgaria under Khan Boris experienced a difficult year due to crop failures and earthquakes. This situation led Boris to consider peace negotiations as he wasn't prepared for war. Interpreting these events as divine signs, Boris initiated talks with the Byzantine Empire, agreeing to adopt Eastern Orthodox Christianity for himself and his people. In return, he sought the assistance of missionaries for the conversion process. During the Byzantine conversion of Bulgaria, the dismantling of Tengris shrines was massively advocated, which met with resistance from Bulgar nobles who were traditionally involved in Tengris rites. In 865, a revolt erupted across Bulgaria's 10 administrative regions against Boris, fueled by dissatisfaction with his new religious policies. The insurgents aimed to overthrow Boris and reinstate Tengrism once again as the state religion. Boris managed to quell the uprising with the help of his loyalists. Boris ordered the execution of the rebellion leaders and their sons, amounting to 52 individuals. For the rest of his life, Boris grappled with feelings of remorse over the severity of his actions, particularly the execution of the sons of the revolt leaders. He sought guidance from Pope Nicholas, questioning if his actions had strayed from the principles of Christian humility. The Pope's response acknowledged Boris's actions as stemming more from zealousness and ignorance rather than malicious intent, assuring him of forgiveness and grace following his penance. From then on, Tengrism and ancient Oguric traditions faded away. At the same time, a new golden age in the region was initiated, with the Bulgars using a variant of the Cyrillic alphabet, which from here found its way to other Slavic regions and later to Russia. The Bulgarian Empire was about to peak culturally, economically, and on a geopolitical level, forming one of the most influential states in all of Europe and the bordering areas. This is where the history of pre-Christian and pre-Slavic Bulgars comes to an end. In conclusion, the Bulgars were a small group of Oguric Turkic warriors of the Ponto-Caspian steppe who created an independent state after the fall of the Turkic Khaganat. Due to invasions from Central Asia, the Bulgars migrated into southeastern Europe and founded the First Bulgarian Empire. While many traces of the ancient Bulgar era have been lost to the cruel flow of time, the Bulgars' legacy remains steadfast for being one of the most important Turkic and steppe peoples in history. Thank you for watching. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. You can support us by becoming a member on YouTube or Patreon and receive exclusive behind-the-scenes footage, as well as early access to all new documentaries,